Production of Swan Song is supported by viewers like you. Thank you. It's been quite a while since the last time we looked at a shogi game, but it's finally time to talk about Morita Shougi for WonderSwan, a port of the 1985 game Morita no Shogi for the PC 8801. It was developed and published by Yuki Enterprise and released on December 22, 1999. Morita Shougi is the second of two shogi games released on the WonderSwan. If you've forgotten what shogi is in the last 4 years since we've looked at Shogi Toryumon, shogi is a Japanese variation of chess, which allows captured pieces to be returned to the board by the capturing player. Pieces can also be promoted by moving them to a promotion zone on the board, which is indicated by flipping the piece over to reveal the character for its promoted form. This alters the piece's movement options. These added rules make shogi more complex than chess, but less complex than Go. Morita Shougi is named after its programmer, Morita Kazuro, which happens to be quite an interesting person. During his second year of studies at Saitama Medical University in 1976, he acquired NEC's one-board microcomputer, the TK-80, and he became obsessed with it. As part of his tinkering with his microcomputer, he ended up writing an Othello game for himself. Fast forward to 1981. Morita signed up for the Musashino Microcomputer Club. The club would gather twice a month and share the latest information on MS-DOS and give classes on the C programming language. There he announced that he was working on Morita Othello, a proper update and release of his earlier work for the TK-80. In 1982, Morita Othello participated in Gekkan ASCII magazine's third Micro Othello League. It wasn't uncommon at the time for computer enthusiast magazines to hold competitions for up-and-coming game programmers to showcase their ability to implement artificial intelligence routines for real-world games such as Othello, usually offering the winner of the competition the chance to have their game published and given a proper release. Given how influential magazines were in the spread of computer culture in Japan at this era, Morita Kazuro quickly became known as a star programmer. He would follow that up with another contest entry, this time to Enix's first game hobbyist programmer contest with Morita no Battlefield, a war game he developed within a 1-month time frame. That ended up winning the contest, awarding him with 1 million yen in cash up front. Enix published the game a year later, and the game would eventually make him 5 million yen in royalties over time. In 1983, he opened up his own development studio, Random House. This studio has no relation to the large American book publisher of the same name or its Japanese branch, which opened in 2003. His first game, Alphos, which was published by Enix and greenlit by Namco, was a proof of concept for whether a proper Xevious port would even be possible within the constraints of PC 8801 hardware. It got a lot of praise for how high quality a release it was at the time and paved the road for a proper Xevious PC 88 port in 1985. Random House would go on to do a bunch of cool stuff, including eventually rebrand to Yuki Enterprise in 1999 and work on fighting games such as Arcana Heart and Samurai Showdown 5. But let's get back to the shogi. Following Morita's success with Othello AI routines, he moved on to his next AI challenge, Shogi. After 2 years of development, Morita Kazuro no Shogi was released in August of 1985 for the PC 8801 home computer. The game became famous for its incredibly strong AI for the time, and that manifested in two major ways over the life of the series. The first is the Dan ranking mode, which became a staple of the series on the Famicom and Super Famicom. Like martial arts, shogi has a Dan rank system defined by the Japan Shogi Association. As soon as 1987's Morita Shougi for Famicom, it became possible to become certified for amateur second queue by acquiring a passcode from completing the game's Dan ranking mode and mailing it into Random House with a short shogi theory questionnaire found in the game's manual. The Super Famicom ports would bump the maximum obtainable Dan ranks to amateur first Dan and third Dan respectively. Of course, this was only possible for about a 2-year period following the release of the game, as applications needed to be manually reviewed by the staff over at Random House. The second is Morita Shougi's repeated participation at the World Computer Shogi Championship. Much like the Micro Othello League that made Morita a star developer in the first place, the WCSC is an event that puts shogi AI routines up against each other in 2 Swiss tournaments on day 1 and day 2, followed by a top 8 round robin on the final day. Morita Shougi entered in the WCSC's first 9 events between 1990 and 1999. They won in 1991, had podium placements for the first 6 events, and top 8 placements for all but the last event in 1999 when they placed 12th. My personal theory as to why Morita Shougi's dominance waned over time was that Morita was extremely talented at writing strong, efficient AI routines and assembly for resource-constrained hardware like 80s computers and 90s home consoles. But from 1992 onwards, resource constraint fell out of fashion, and commodity PC hardware seeing incredible performance gains each year was in. By his last participation in 1999, the winning computer's clock speed was more than 16 times the clock speed of Morita's PC H98S that won in 1992. The winning machine from only 2 years later would have 40 times the clock speed. The 90s and early 2000s were a wild time for CPU performance. As of about 10 years ago, the winners of this championship aren't even running on a single computer anymore, they're running on entire clusters of machines. This is no longer just a code efficiency contest, it's also become a hardware arms race. Unlike the home consoles of Morita Shougi, which have been quite feature-rich, the WonderSwan version is surprisingly bare bones. You can play against the CPU at one of 3 different difficulty levels, choose one of 7 handicap modes, and whether to start or go second. If you turn the WonderSwan off in the middle of a match, you can resume or watch a replay of the game up until where you were. There's also a rewind feature in the pause menu that lets you go back indefinitely if you make an accidental input or just messed up. That's about it in terms of actual features, which is honestly disappointing for a game of this stature in this genre. In comparison to the last shogi game we looked at, Shogi Toryumon, this UI is much more cleanly laid out. Instead of displaying all UI elements at all times, it gradually displays things as they become relevant over the course of a game, so it isn't visually overwhelming right out of the gate. The interface is divided into 4 columns from left to right. The left column displays your opponent's captured pieces on top and the current turn number on the bottom. The main middle column is the game board, the right column displays your captured pieces on the bottom, and the column on the extreme right displays a line of text saying whether it's your turn or whether the computer is calculating their next move. Morita Shougi was such an institution in the world of shogi on home consoles, but by the time this version came along, interest in the series was already waning. The Famicom and Super Famicom releases of the game were incredibly impressive at the time, and the Dan rank certification gimmick certainly helped sell it to aspiring shogi players at the time. By 1996, online shogi platforms started popping up left and right in Japan. Much like with fighting games, a lot of players would prefer to face off against evenly matched opponents rather than try and have fun against a limited amount of CPU presets. Morita Shougi 64 did attempt to make up for this by building a dial-up modem directly into the game cartridge, but that only came along in 1998. Morita Shougi DS also saw success mostly due to having online play and being in the right place at the right time for the DS's wider, more casual audience. But aside from those two, and that one guy on YouTube who seems to like the PS2 version of Morita Shougi a little bit too much, there isn't much in terms of lasting interest in any of the games released after the series' golden age, and the WonderSwan version is definitely one of the lesser entries.